So we are officially live. I'm not sure people can hear and see us just yet, but that's all good. And I'm getting tangled up in my cables here, so that's better. Right, so when you guys can hear and see us, just say something about it. Hi, Scott. Quick visit, that's all right. We got Easy Carnivore here. I'm glad to hear that, Robert. Yay, Bowerbird. Good morning, Pim and Harry. Hi, everyone. And Luki says, woo, we're on. Okay, that's awesome. So, as you know, we are having Harry with us today to talk a little bit about what I was thinking that we never know where it goes when Harry is on, but my idea was to talk about, different fatty acids and, different fatty acid profiles, how they affect our bodies. There has been a lot of talk about in the carnivore community that stearic acid is really good, linoleic acid is not so good, what's causing diabetes here and there, and pork PUFAs, omega-6s especially, as dangerous as it would be to eat a vegetable oil, etc. And who better to ask than Harry?
Yeah.
So you can obviously ask as many questions as you like. I'll put them up on the screen. And
Yep.
Meanwhile, I just said it to her, I've been really busy this morning and I'm really hungry, so I have a few boiled eggs that I'm going to eat.
Fair enough.
Meanwhile, so
Yeah,
I'm going to let you take
as
over.
you know, I just got up and just got out of the shower, and I'm just still sort of half asleep, and because I when it comes to Sundays, and I always get up later. That's why you hardly see me until much later on when I got my act together.
No,
So
you're not often here.
that's it. Yeah, it's always because I usually go late to bed on a Saturday. It's just out of habit and things, or especially if I'm out and about. So and come in late home, I'm going to be a wreck the next morning. But I just go for it and just and yeah.
See if your brain works today then.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of a bit slow at the moment, but we'll get it going. Yeah, it's been a very interesting sort of strange period in the carnivore community. I think some people have realised I've been saying for a while that some of this sort of repeat nonsense is infiltrating the carnivore community, and that's where a lot of this is coming from. That it's not really, because if you look at some of the traditional carnivore people, like Paul Mason has actually spoken about this and said, well, I can't see anything in the literature that actually would tell me that there is an issue with pork or these other animal foods. So I mean, there's a lot of animal studies, there's a lot of associational studies, but that's not causal. There's no inference of causality there that Paul can actually point to. Even in, I think, his last video that I actually saw of him, he actually stated that this is his sort of theory. Now he's pushing it this way, but he says the weight of evidence is so strong that it can't be otherwise. Logically, it wouldn't make any other sense. And I'm going, well, if you've got a 1, as Bart would say, show it. Demonstrate it. If you don't have a 1, you've only got an argument. You don't have science.
So what is the strong evidence that he has towards that?
Well, what he does is he approaches things from a very reductionist way, and he focuses on a lot of studies that are highly confounded. Like there's a Chinese study that he actually showed, and there people were basically doing like 40% fat, and it either was carbs 40%. Actually, I do have that China study, and I've called it the China study from Salad Boy. Yeah, I know. I can be amusing. I had to call it something to remember it. and the low carbohydrate diet, which they actually indicate was a fat of 40% and carbohydrates of 46% as energy. That's not a low carbohydrate diet, you know. Can I just?
No, not at all.
Yeah, I'll just share that. I'll just share that for a sec.
Yeah. So maybe 3 months
Which,
ago, I'm pretty sure I saw Salad Boy put out a video saying that bacon can cause diabetes, but I can't find that video. So I don't know if it's gone or if I just can't find it.
yeah, look,
I
somebody
wanted to watch
mentioned it to me, but they did mention to me that he actually said something like that, but I couldn't actually find anything as well.
Right.
So
Maybe it's gone.
that, like, I don't know whether he's actually exactly, and I'm not going to go through every single one of his videos trying to find it. If anybody knows exactly, you know, the timestamp, you know, put it up in the chat, and then we can actually bring it up and review it. Is that visible at the moment? Am I sharing or not?
I can add it like that.
Okay, so this is the Chinese study that he actually, which was a 6-month randomized controlled feeding trial that he actually mentions about. But I'll just zoom in to that level, and if we look at this low carbohydrate diet, and there's your composition: fat 40, carbohydrate 46. That's not like a low carb diet. That's a mixed macro. That's a sad sort of style of diet. And these people would have basically used, what they've actually used is seed oils. They haven't used basically, you know, it's not basically, you know, high quality animal foods. We're talking about seed oils. So,
and that is probably the worst kind of macros that you can have.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't think he understands the Randall cycle.
No.
This is because from everything that I've actually looked at of his, he never mentions the Randall cycle, and I don't think he understands the Randall cycle, which is the issue. But you know, it's not only, you know, Paul Mason that's actually mentioned this. Ken Berry has also jumped into the argument, and so has basically Sean Baker, and they've both spoken about this in their own way. Obviously, Paul Mason is a much higher quality scientist, you know, in terms of his capability, and you know, at the end of the day, I'm not basically you know, appeal to authority or anything like that, but I would basically you know, would have to fully agree with Paul that there is nothing in the literature, and it just doesn't make sense from a standpoint of, you know, humans and hominin history, and even our closest relatives that have basically got very low capacity because they ApoE44s. They've got very low capacity for, you know, for managing sugar and fat at the same time. You know what we discussed last time, and so and we know from you know, my past videos, which I've actually discussed some of the research in primates, and we look at these primates and what are they actually hunting? They're hunting not only small monkeys, but they're also hunting small piglets. You know, so you know, pigs. You go to all the actual islands of the Pacific, you can't really have cattle because it's just, there's not enough grass. There's too much sand. It's too sandy. So most of the actual the primary foods of islanders in the Pacific was basically pork and fish. And so these were the foods that they primarily ate. So these are ancestral foods. They can't be bad. And do you think they actually gave them, you know, they were actually feeding them grass? First of all, pigs don't eat grass. But do you think they were actually feeding them grass, or they were feeding them really high quality stuff? No, they were just throwing all their scraps, and a lot of their scraps are carbohydrate rich scraps, because these islanders have, you know, a lot of tubers and stuff like that. So basically, a lot of the pigs were eating tubers. So they're not eating, you know, a good quality food, pigs have not really ever really, even in Okinawa, in most of the places, even in Greece, I know from my father, I've spoken to my father and said, what did you guys use? Oh, we just threw anything, all the scraps, whatever, to our pigs, because he used to lard with his mother. And so, there's a difference between somebody from his ivory tower, somebody that doesn't have any connection to, my parents come from a farming background, from a rural background, on both sides of the family. We had rural land. Actually, we still have rural land in Greece. And, being the son, I'm going to inherit that, so it's, but the thing is, we have land and we know how to manage land. We know the animals that are actually, and how we deal with them, what we feed them and stuff like that. So from somebody from, who's a doctor, who's a city slicker, to basically think that they can read a couple of idiotic studies on rats and stuff like that, and from there extrapolate basically what's good for humans and what isn't, is really problematic. I mean, there's not only those sort of issues that are a problem. There's also the issues that demonizing animal foods that have been part of our diet for a very long time is completely wrong in that regard. I'm just going to stop sharing that for a sec so I can actually grab the.
So Harriet was just shouting at, asking who this Ray Pete is. What's his deal? Do you want to just give us the very, very short rundown on that?
I'll give you the short rundown.
Yeah.
Ray Pete basically is one of those academics out there who, in the past, has association with a number of other academics that are pro-sugar. Now, some people have said that Ray Pete has taken sugar money in the past. There's a lot of that, but I to be honest, I haven't really gone away and researched Ray Pete in terms of his connections to different lobby groups and stuff like that in his past life. But I know that some of the people around him have been involved. So how much he's involved or not is a different story. But I think also he comes from a tradition similar to remember Walter Kempner that we sort of discussed a while back. And this is pre-Randall cycle, and this is basically showing that that you can lose weight. You can lose weight on anything. I mean, you can take cyanide and you can lose weight. So that's not an issue. It's a matter of the health outcomes. Yes, you can lose weight we see from the Church of Anorexia Vegana, how they are on a very low calorie sugar diet and they lose weight. It's not surprising, if you're getting some level of satiation from the actual fiber, all of those fruits and vegetables and whatever else, but you're not getting enough energy, and so you're in a deficit, so you'll burn part of your own body. That's there are plenty of ways, as I say, to weight loss. I mean, there's Weight Watchers, there's all sorts of organizations out there. The difference is what is optimal for the human body and what is healthy. That's a completely different story altogether. Our bodies require high quality protein to mitigate both sarcopenia and osteoporosis as we're going into older age. It requires sodium. These diets are very low in sodium because they're very high in insulin and would become very water retentive. As a consequence, you can't take in enough salt when you're in a very much in a state of high sugar burning. So if you're in a glycolytic sort of state of existence, you will have problems basically taking in sufficient levels of certain electrolytes or holding on to them. And Walter Kempner knew that back in the 1930s. That is why he only recommended, if you remember when we were chatting about it a while ago, Pim, he only recommended iron as a supplement. and eventually once people corrected their health issues or whatever, that they should go back to eating meats and other things. So he wasn't promoting a vegan diet or a plant-based diet. He was promoting an intervention before we understood you could use keto for the same purposes, and before we understood the Randall cycle from, Philip Randall from the 1963. So before we understood these things, people playing around and experimenting. There was a lot of he was a person who left Germany, and there was a lot of experimentation on hormones in the 20s and 30s in Germany, and different dietary approaches, and they were playing around with the macros and all that to see what the effects would be, to understand hormonal changes and shifts in people. Especially they were looking at people with diabetes 1 and a whole lot of other conditions, how they could actually play around and mitigate things. So, I mean, that's where that came. And that research has its place and is very informative about, giving us insights into human physiology. But it can be very dangerous when you extrapolate from some of that sort of stuff and then think that, there is an argument. So these guys were influenced by a number of these sort of past experiments. So they came to the conclusion that sugar should be the primary fuel. And pretty much, Ray Peat is a believer that this is the primary fuel. And while he's correct that that seed oils are bad, on that point we're in agreement with Ray Peat, and his mob, that seed oils are bad, but they have no problems in guzzling down as much sugar as possible in any form. And this is where the issue lies. They put forward a whole lot of rat studies because that's all they've got to base. And we know the rat chow tends to be, comprised primarily of sugars and high amounts of seed oil. That's what the rat chow is. And as a consequence of that, you're engaging the Randall cycle. And also there's a problem with the rat, fat. You could say the metabolism of fats is a problem. They're very different cows. They're not designed to consume large amounts of fat. They don't have the transcription factors. They don't have the enzymes to basically convert things. They are very poor, where humans are very, very good at converting LA to arachidonic acid. We don't have that big problem. And people will say, well, I remind people that arachidonic acid in comparison has 5 double bonds, where linoleic acid only has 2 double bonds. So it's actually more, and nobody in the paleo low carb or that would actually poo-poo arachidonic acid. They know that it's an essential part of the brain, essential part of cell membranes. It's cell protective. It has reparative functions, and nobody would poo-poo it. But it has far more, and when you look at DHA, it got 6 double bonds, but it's a key component. In an inflammatory environment, if you're eating a SAD diet and you're eating a lot of toxic stuff, these sort of fats can be vulnerable, even though they're essential fatty acids. They can still be vulnerable to damage. If you basically extract it with high temperatures and a whole lot of other solvents and whatever else, again, whether it's through a refining process for seed oils, or whether it's basically through inappropriate extraction methods using chemicals to extract more from fish to get fish oils, there you can actually increase the damage, the oxidation, and the rancidity, plus the level of aldehydes introduced into those supplements. You've done research and you've actually demonstrated that. And that's the difference between real food and non-real food, and also the protective effect of basically how vitamin E in its in its more complex form, not in its supplemental form, but it's in its complex form, how that can incorporate into our cell membranes together with arachidonic acid, and they can do their job. And in a low inflammatory environment, in a low carbohydrate environment, it's not a problem, because you will have the upregulation of glutathione to basically act as an electron donor to the vitamin E to support those fatty acids that are incorporated in our cell membrane. So it's a non-issue. But in a highly inflamed environment, it becomes, a lot of vitamin E can become pro-oxidant, as a consequence, especially in seed oils, where they actually add quite a bit to reduce the oxidation byproducts. But all it does is basically just create more of a mess in the long run, especially when it's stored for a long time and all that. And people need to understand that those sort of differences. So these characters have come from that tradition of sugar, where they've come to believe that sugar is the primary fuel, isn't a problem. So that's that part. And on the other hand, they've seen the research from rats. And if you take a look, even Christopher Walker, who's a light repeat type person, even Chris Master John has become, I think, has shifted to a sort of a mixed diet, Right. Ignoring the Randall cycle and all that from the stuff that he talks about. And that's where exactly Chris Walker is also in that sort of environment. So they are what I call repeat lights, these two characters. And what repeat has actually been pushing is that free fatty acids are really bad for the body. And what they base that is on all these linoleic acid studies coming from rat studies, which they are overloading them, and they have very poor enzymatic capacity, which they don't mention this, to convert that La to AA. If you're a poor converter as a species, which is what a rat is, then you're going to have a problem. So to argue, then to extrapolate from that, from a different physiology of a different animal, and then basically say that this will happen in humans, when you can't point to one study that's with a 1, they're all zeros. We've got, if we want to look at randomized control studies and clinical studies, none of them have ever shown or demonstrated this this problem. Even Christopher Gartner from Stanford University, who did the A to Z study, and he did the traditional Atkins, which showed that Atkins was superior to Ornish, to Zone, and to the Learn diet being pushed. These people basically doing the traditional Atkins diet. What was the traditional Atkins diet? Bacon and eggs in the morning. Shitloads of bacon and eggs in the morning. Now, what has bacon and eggs got? Both of them. They're very high in basically these omega-6 animal PUFAs. Both of them. Eggs are very high as well. As I said, the guy that was actually having the 25 eggs a day, he was taking in 17.5 grams of PUFA in his diet every single day and had no health issues whatsoever. Animal foods, even in high amounts. And if you're eating, let's say, 100 grams of pork, or you're going to get in about half a gram of PUFA. So if you have 500 grams of pork, which is, we're talking about a pound of meat plus 1.1 pounds of meat, you will basically get about 2.5. And 2.5 is close to ancestral levels of PUFA. So you're not getting a lot. Let's be, because it's a very small amount. But even if you were eating 25 eggs a day, you said, I'm not going to have any steaks. I'm going to have the eggs every day. And you're getting 17.5 grams. You're not seeing any pathology even after decades of consumption. What would I base myself on? A human that's been consuming 17.5 grams of PUFA every single day for decades upon decades. He's 88 years old. For more than half his life, he's consumed this amount. This is actually, he's been consuming for more than one generation, because one generation of humans is 33 years. So he's been consuming more than one generation of human and shows no ill effect. And I'm going to base, a 1-month rat study as my basis for my diet. That's what Paul's saying.
So this is eggs primarily, or from pork, etc.?
No. I'm just using that as an example. Yeah. That the guy that actually was taking this amount. So where Ray Pete may have an argument is where free fatty acid from seed oils, yeah, that's a problem. But you can't extrapolate from that all PUFA is bad, because that's wrong. You're extrapolating too far. My angle is that what all these characters are missing, including Paul, is the deuterium story. That's what they're missing.
Before you start with that,
I won't start yet.
Okay. Because we had some comments here, and Scott said that Paul Mason has moved away from his original 1 omega-3 to 3 omega-3 to 6 ratio.
That's right.
I'm not really sure what he means there. Yeah. Removing the idea of that ratio at all.
I've heard that as well. And, I've actually listened to him, and I've heard that, and I agree with him completely.
So you don't think that the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio is?
Yeah, I think the when you look at Okinawans, for instance, who are some of the longest lived people, they say we start the day with pork, we finish the day with pork, and they eat quite a few eggs as well. And so they would be getting quite, and they don't eat as much fish like the other Japanese do. So they're not a high consumer of fish either. So their ratios would be worse than that of the general Japanese population, but they still live longer than the general population. So, if there was a causal relationship between high consumptions of pork and eggs compared to fish, we would see it there would be a difference between the Okinawa population and the general Japanese population. The general Japanese population would live longer than the Okinawans, than the older Okinawans that are on their traditional diet. Let me just rephrase that, because some of the younger ones have moved away from their traditional diet, and they will not live longer. This is another reason why the actual, even though they've got a lot of centenarians on Okinawa, the actual level of sort of the average lifespan is actually coming down in Okinawa, because of there's an American base there, and there is a lot of seed oil use and fast food outlets that come with the American troops. And obviously a lot of the younger people are mesmerized by the American lifestyle, and actually starting to have been consuming now for the last couple of decades a lot of this junk food. So their culture has been quite eroded, especially in the more sort of urban areas compared to the rural areas. So there is a stark difference between those. And I just wanted to point that out, So yes, seed oil is bad. Other things like, I don't think the ratios, I think the ratios really came in from the point of view that we have to go back a bit, and there was a lot of talk about whether it was, there was a number of academics that were saying the most important thing is basically getting it from plant sources, the sort of the essential fatty acids. For whatever reason, it was basically, this was an approach. There was a number of academics that were pushing this line. It seemed that because they came from a plant-based type ideology and background, they sort of dominated that conversation, and as a consequence, they pushed forward with their ideas and made and to resolve the issue of this imbalance between omega-6s and omega-3s for conversion purposes, because when you've got too much of one or too much of the other, you have problems converting. So that's where the problem lies. But it's not a problem if you've basically are converting a whole lot of the LA and you're not converting any of the ALA or very little of the ALA, because in animal foods, there is next to no ALA. There is a bit, but very little. The majority that we get is DHA and EPA, which is basically the animal forms that our bodies can use without having to do any conversions. So this is why on an animal-based diet or a more carnivorous diet or a low-carb or paleo or whatever diet, you're getting sufficient DHA and EPA from animal foods, and there's no reason to really worry about the conversion or the ratios, because you will get, and the body will basically deal with any excesses by either getting rid of it. The body's pretty good at managing a lot of this sort of stuff, converting it, storing it, or getting rid of it, or doing a number of things. So it's not an issue. The issue only lies with two things when it comes to these PUFA fats. It's, are they rancid? And have they been extracted in a way where there are just too many aldehydes in them? That's really where it comes to. That's why the ratios are unimportant. The ratios originate from the plant-based paradigm of having to convert LA from plants and ALA from plants to their respective animal forms. That's where this whole notion, and there is no good science. I mean, when I say to people, you point me to the science where ratios are important, they can't, because there isn't any. It's basically a myth that's actually being perpetuated by those who have been promoting a plant-based ideology for a very long time. And that ideology goes all the way back to the 60s. It's been around for a long time, from the hippie days onwards, that have been pushing this plant-based, and this ideology about, the importance of, ratios and conversions and stuff like that. As if humans in nature would be sitting there trying to work out their ratios or stuff like that. What a bunch of nonsense.
If we go back 10, 20,000 years in time, they say that their diets were pretty much looking like a ratio of 1 to 3. Is that still correct, but totally irrelevant?
No, look, I think that's absolute nonsense, because if you take a look of, at what humans were eating in different periods of time, there are different periods of time when they're consuming much more PUFA and other periods of time when they're consuming very little PUFA. So there are so many variations, even amongst the Inuit. There is a lot of variations between seasonality. So it's not something which, say, well, this is how they're eating every single day. No, there isn't. There's a lot of seasonality, a lot of foods that they may consume. Sometimes they may be closer to the coast, so they may be consuming more birds, and birds tend to have higher amount of PUFA compared to, ruminant animals. So there's all sorts of variations around the world. And when you look at all these variations of different people eating different animal products, you go, well, I don't see pathology historically. So where is the issue? This is why even Paul, like myself, has moved away from, and I'm glad he has, because he's a big player in the game. And when, and Paul has, he like me, he goes away. I go into PubMed and I'm keeping on searching all these different variations of words and all that, trying to find things, because I don't want somebody to basically pull up a study and go, oh, Harry, you're wrong. Here it is, So
no, you're wrong.
Exactly. So I've covered my ass, by going through and trying to find in the literature something. And each time I look at the stuff that these guys put up, I go, oh, that's confounded from Randall cycle. That's coming from that source, or that's coming from that source, or whatever. And I realized quite quickly that these people are sort of, trying to hang their argument on very poor research.
Yeah.
And we need to be very careful about this sort of stuff. I mean, let me just find, where did I put? It's always trying to. Could you, while you're checking a few questions, some of the others, I'll just try and find where I've got that other piece of.
So unless you're a vegan, even if you are eating a sad diet or you are keto and eating an amount of vegetables, you don't think the ratio matters. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think that the ratio really matters. I think really, if, let me just come one step back. If you're not getting enough of the essential fatty acids, then you've got a problem.
Then, yeah, fair enough.
You know, you still need to get the an amount of essential fatty acids. There's still that requirement for a whole lot of biological processes in the body. You need more omega-6 actually than omega-3. Omega-3s are really basically even the PUFA component of your brain. Let's just look at that. That part of the PUFA component of your brain, 45% is DHA. 55% is arachidonic acid. The majority of it is arachidonic acid, is omega-6. There's more omega-6 in your brain than omega-3. 1 point. Second point, the only place that you have high concentrations of DHA is in your eye. That's it. The rest of the body, primarily all other cells, have a lot of incorporation of arachidonic acid, and there's a reason for it. It's not a pro-inflammatory. In a low inflammatory environment, it basically plays its role as a repairer of tissue. That's what its purpose is, to repair. As long as it's not basically being oxidized and being damaged by seed oils and shitloads of highly glycating sugars like honey, 7 times more glycating than glucose. As long as you're not adding that, and it's great to add a lot of saturated fat, the studies of with a lot of sugar like honey, highly glycating honey, to these fats. Great product to sell to people. I'm being facetious, as you guys know, you know who I'm talking about. So, the reality is that we need arachidonic acid. It plays it actually has anti-inflammatory properties as well in the cells. It has a lot of, signaling, cell signaling, modulation, and all sorts of things. So it's really important. And that is why we probably need, for the majority of our tissue, slightly more omega, arachidonic acid than DHA. And even too much EPA can be a problem as well. We know it can cause some, hormonal and other imbalances in the body. It's not very well understood. There's a lot of reductionist science in that area as well. And that's why I don't touch into the EPA argument, because as far as I'm concerned, there are some issues there, but it's really when it's coming from supplements rather than real foods, because there it's quite imbalanced in a lot of the supplements.
Yep.
So I say to people, eat fish, eat pork, bacon, and all that sort of stuff, and you'll be fine, because that's what our ancestors did in large amounts. Now, let me just bring.
And once you're done with that, I have a question for you that I'm going to put up on the screen. So just remind me in case I forget.
Yep. That's fine. So let me just open that up.
Right.
So this is one that comes from the Low Carb Down Under, or the Low Carb Doctors, lowcarbdoctors.com.au. So I'll just share. This is a study that I've actually seen, but they've actually, what they did was they grafted it, so they did the actual charting of it, where it's in the actual study, when you look at it, it's all in numbers.
Yeah.
and I don't want to go through a whole lot of bloody numbers because it just, you have to go through and calculate each one of them, and it just takes too long. And this is just a beautiful, illustration, and I don't have to basically do all this sort of shit. Somebody's already done it for me.
Exactly.
So this is in regards to aldehydes, what I've been saying for a while. So as you can see, oops, I'll just stay there. That's a study down there. So if anybody wants to, I'll just bring up the actual study. So if anybody wants to go away and actually search for it. So that's the actual study there. Okay, and we'll come all the way out. And as you can see, these are different fats. You can see lard, butter, olive oil, and sunflower oil. And that is the total aldehyde that is produced. As you can see, everybody knows that butter is very low in PUFA. But still, and even tallow, there's another one, I can't find it. I'd actually found, well, I actually have it somewhere, but I literally, I've got so many PDFs, I didn't actually put the writing on it, but it does have, even tallow will produce slightly higher aldehydes compared to lard. Well, no, about the same, slightly less. It's somewhere in between butter and lard.
Okay.
Tallow. So it still will produce close to smoking point, slightly more than lard. But we're told that pig's fat is really bad for you, then tallow is fine.
Mm.
So
because of the omega-6s.
Exactly. And butter is better. But as I said, there is, and as even Paul Mason agrees with me on this one, is the way fats are incorporated into animal flesh is completely different than what it's in a seed. And the different extraction process and all that, and the damaging effects that has. And this is the difference between where butter is a slightly processed food. So it's a slightly processed. And I think that is the reason why the more we process things and the more we denature or change them from their natural sort of state in their own natural stability that they have, the more problematic foods become. Olive oil is nearly double that of lard in terms of aldehydes. So if anybody thinks that cooking with olive oil is a great idea, I would say no. Stick to what the Okinawans did, the Sardinians, and traditionally the Greeks did before, after the Marshall Plan and after the Second World War. They were brainwashed in believing that they should basically up their production. Well, at the time, the country was impoverished, was decimated, and I can understand why they built the olive oil industry, because it was much easier than basically building up herds of animals again. So understandable.
I'm assuming that these have been tested on fresh products. So the olive oil and the sunflower oil has been tested on a product in a newly opened bottle.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, this is what we're looking at. Because it has been definitely tested on basically new products in that regard. Yes, but at the same time, certain oils will become quite rancid over time. So I'll just stop that and find the other one.
Yeah. So
I just want to point that out. The difference is because people argue, olive oil's better, or butter's better, or tallow better than lard, and lard's really bad. And I go, well, show me the evidence. There's lower oxidative products and there's lower aldehydes. So where's the argument there? There is no argument on that side of things. So
just
that
the
was
omega-6 argument. That's the only argument.
which is a ludicrous argument in itself. It's never been proven. It's just basically all derived from other things, which we'll talk. But you had another question you're going to pop up.
Yes. Before that, I just want to clarify. So aldehydes are secondary oxidation products. Before they are formed, you need to get the first step, the first primary oxidation, and that happens very, very quickly. So when you open a bottle of oil, that will start happening because you're going to let oxygen in, and then depending on what temperature you're storing it in, if there's light exposure on the bottle, etc., that's going to make things go faster. So literally after, let's say, depending on how many primary oxidation products you have in there, if you have a lot of them, the process to create aldehydes is going to be much, much quicker. But if you have a baseline of whatever it said, that 200-300, then within 3 weeks, maybe 4 if you're lucky, those are going to start going up. So the shelf life of oils is not good ever.
Exactly. I can actually share that as well, and it's another one from the low carb, based on a different study out of this is out of China.
Here we go.
And you can actually see this is seed oils, and you can actually see basically.
So that's primary oxidation product, I take it.
Yeah, that's it. And this is just basically sitting in storage time,
and that goes
one
up
day
very quickly.
This is days, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 days. I mean, this is just 8 days after it's been processed. Look how high it is after 8 days, let alone it's in the supermarket or elsewhere for a very long time. And some people actually, reuse their seed oils. They'll put it back into a container and actually reuse it for their chips and whatever else they're actually producing. So they're just putting massive amounts of shit in their body.
I mean, I used to test the primary oxidation, or the PV value, which I think that is peroxide value. And I think that is exactly what it is. And when you are taking a sample, if it's hot, you're screwed. I can't do it quick enough. I can never get a 0 reading because I can't do it quick enough. It starts oxidizing straight away. If it's cold and if I have it chilled, unfortunately, you need to measure it at room temperature. I can get very close to a 0 value when we actually have a really good oil. But the point is that as soon as it's exposed to oxygen, heat, light, the process is going to take place. So that's why it's pointless to use any kind of oil, because whatever you do, you will at least get the primary oxidation products in there. And then obviously, if you store it, you will get more aldehydes. So yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and that's the sort of these are, and the other one that was basically new stuff. This was new stuff that was just tested, opened up and tested. And so when you do something from new, I mean, I would have loved to see somebody actually testing oils that had been, let's say, in a fast food outlet for a number of days. Where they'd be overused.
I think my supervisor used to do that for aldehydes with NMR, and it's crazy. It's if you want a heart attack, then go and eat deep fried food when they haven't emptied the fryers for a couple of days.
Exactly.
Not good.
Yeah.
But as you can see here on this graph, I just want to. I mean, you can't see what it is after one day, but literally, an okay PV would be very, very low in the single figures generally. So once you're getting to something like storage time after 3 days, we're almost up to 150. We could never, ever sell a fish oil that was up there, not even to the pet food industry. It would just be considered too bad quality. So, if you're going to do oil, buy a very, very small bottle and drink it straight away.
and look what they're actually feeding people. This is what a lot of people don't realize, that as I said to people, the seed oils are the key driver of all the different diseases, the modern diseases. They are, because they've got these high, and this is where the confounding information comes in the actual science. When you go back to using animal fats, you don't see this. You don't see any of this sort of stuff. It's only when we look at seed oils. And so these are the differences between something which comes from an animal and something which comes from an extraction process from a plant. There are massive differences in the order of both primary and secondary oxidation products, plus aldehydes being part of that secondary, compared to basically any other food. You would really have to put actually, because even animal foods, even when you leave them out, let's say, like, there's a number of populations that have fermented meats. So they will ferment the fats, they'll ferment all this. And even those products, when don't have a problem. It just seems the way we don't have any mechanistic studies, but it seems like the way things are incorporated in animal foods is such that they are stable, far more stable than anything else out there. All foods, all fats, all foods that you're actually putting in will create some byproducts. Just oxidizing any molecule of food, whether it comes from a carb, a fat, or even when you're actually insufficient in those other energy and you end up using a bit of your protein for that purpose. All these things at the end of the day, when they are oxidized in the mitochondria, will create some byproducts of oxidation. So, it's just the way it is. The difference is you don't want to be putting in your body massive loads that the body can't cope with. It's the excessive amount, and that's the difference between something that is highly processed and something that comes from an animal that isn't. You're going to say something, Pim. I
have a squeaky dog here.
You got a squeaky dog.
Other side.
Oh, I want some meat. I want some.
She's never quiet. So,
okay.
Right. No. I think we've been pretty clear about what we think about seed oils in general and how dangerous they are and how quickly they actually get destroyed. So the question I wanted to put up was from Science Unbiased, and he says, did anyone see Dave Feldman versus Siobhan on pork? Her LPA significantly elevated on mostly pork diet. She switched to beef and it felt like a rock.
No, I haven't. So LP little a isn't a bad thing. So let's just clarify that. But it is an indicator of some sort of, that there is something happening that needs to be repaired or whatever. Now, is she consuming certain other things as well? I don't know. Is she a poor converter? She may be one of those few people that are very poor converters. There are some, don't get me wrong. The majority of people are in that intermediate level. There are a few that are very poor converters, like that are similar. It's a small percentage of the population that are poor converters, and then there are really high end converters like me. I've got the genes to convert both the ALA and LA at a very high level. So I can actually produce much higher enzymes to do that conversion compared to other people. So you've got the average sort of people, and then you've got people right at the bottom that are really poor converters like the rats. Those people may have problems. That's a possibility. That's what was that?
The rat people.
Yeah. Look, I don't.
I'm being rude.
Yeah, I know. Look, I don't know about whether it's what her genetics are. I don't know basically what other things that she's doing. Is she on a mixed diet? There can be a lot of confounding factors when it comes to an N of 1, and so we have to be very clear. We can't extrapolate from an N of 1, for the rest of us. Because that isn't science. That's just basically an N of 1. Anecdotal. It's all anecdotes. Bart does it. Bart does it much better.
I have to get him to
do the anecdotes.
We can't do it.
We basically just need to record him and then just have him in the background.
Yeah. Anecdotes.
Yes.
Sorry.
So look, I
Okay.
think that's all I can say about that. I'll just bring
Quickly
this.
though,
Yep.
Bowerbird is asking if you can have the link to the graph. I don't know if it was the first or the second one. The first one, I think you gave them the name of the study, so maybe it's the second one.
Look, it's basically been yeah, it's if you go to the low carb doctors.com, you will find it there. You will find it on their website somewhere. I can't remember now off the top of my head. So yeah. Look. If I get a chance later on to be able to find it, I'll find it and I'll link it. I'll do it that way. So right now, God, that'd be challenging.
Christina says, so why is Paul against Lard? I guess she's talking about Paul Mason. Is he against Lard?
No, Paul isn't. I haven't heard Paul say anything against Lard. Okay. No.
Is it Saladino then we're talking about?
It's only
that's probably what we've been talking about the whole
That's exactly
time.
yeah, and exactly. It's about Paul and being influenced by the sort of the Ray Peat sort of fan club that are basically pushing an agenda where to have leaner meats.
So how come? I mean, I've
now
before,
let me just I just want to touch on one thing.
Okay, go on.
Yep. These people are basically being looking at a lot of the actual, like, they quote epidemiological studies, and all these studies are highly confounded because they're all seed oil related. So all these people who they've actually done, and some of the Mendelian studies as well, which is again looking at genetics of people free eating, not randomized or anything like that. These are people that are based on a SAD diet, and they're just looking at the genetic differences in expression between different people. Well, it's just different capacities to cope with oxidation, really, that people have. There are some genetics, there is a sort of a bell curve in that regard, but that doesn't basically mean that PUFA from animals is a problem. The PUFA that's being shown to be picked up on these studies is basically coming from the seed oils, so they're making arguments, false arguments, because we agree with them on the seed oil things, but you can't extrapolate then to all PUFA. Anyway, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was more curious, like, here we got this guy who I think have put out some pretty good content in the past, written a book about the carnivore diet, which I think, I haven't read it, but from what I gather, it's really good, and it seems to be really good. And then he turns around, starts eating honey, and all of a sudden everything goes downhill, and bacon is to blame for diabetes. What happened? How can someone be converted that way, if you like?
I don't know. See, I haven't. I know that he's had like chats with vegans and chats with some of the Ray Peat people and a whole lot of other people around. He's also been speaking to Cordain as well, the paleo master, as I call him. Mm-hmm. And Cordain also pushes some of this nonsense about his anti-salt and he gives examples of a population that he looked at, a tribal population, but they actually consume quite a lot of tubers, quite a lot of carbohydrate. So they tend to be like Walter's, subjects back in the 1930s. They tend to consume higher levels of foods that will push up insulin. These people, if they did consume more salt, they would be very highly water retentive and very unhealthy. So when you're in a state where, and they don't live very long anyway. So just because they're a tribal population, they don't have any longevity, any centenarians amongst them anyway. So, who cares, Mr. Cordain? Whether, they eat more tubers or whatever, they can stick them where the sun doesn't shine. As far as I'm concerned, it's not doing them much for their health, so it's just nonsense. And he's been talking with these sort of people and having conversations with a number of these characters, both private and public, and I think they've been influencing him in a number of different ways.
Okay.
And because he doesn't have the arguments against some of this sort of stuff, and I go, why don't you come back to the carnivore community, Paul, and ask some of us that have challenged these people, and we will give you the arguments why some of these things are deleterious. We will explain the Randall cycle to you. We will explain some of these tribal populations, both their how long they live, and also why they eat in a certain way, and they don't require certain types of minerals in their diet or whatever, because there is reasons physiologically why they don't. So because of their diet and their lifestyle and stuff like that. I mean, there are other populations, tribal populations, that basically eat once every 3 days. There are a lot of different variations out there. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily optimal.
Yeah.
The actual way of eating we're talking about here, there's a difference between the actual way of eating and the foods that we ate. The foods that we ate, we've got good evidence, millions of years of collagen from bones that actually shows very high levels of N15. That's basically slam dunk. We know our ancestors were highly carnivorous. As the planet warmed and the mega beasts basically became, some of them evolved and became leaner animals. Others basically went by the way of the dodo, literally extinct. And as this happened, very fatty animals became much harder to gain in our environment. This is why we shifted eventually to agriculture and domestication to try and actually create more fatter animals. If you take a look historically back, these really fat type animals. Why? Because we were trying to mimic and replicate something that had also had started to no longer be in nature, because it got warmer. And if you're in a warmer environment, even humans, you've got less subcutaneous fat and less subcutaneous fat requirements, because you don't need it to, you're not in a cold climate. So this is another reason why I think the Neanderthals went by the wayside, because they had far more subcutaneous fat and couldn't thermoregulate themselves properly, and became less efficient hunters as the climate changed and got warmer, and literally snuffed them out because they were too specialized for cold climates. There's a lot of things why these things happen. And when you look at things in a very reductionist way and in a very narrow way, and ignore some of this archaeological evidence, you end up where you end up, like Paul has. Anyway.
Yes. Thank you so much, Luke. Apparently we are two of his favorite content creators. Thank you, Luke.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Yeah. Is the carnivore said with Siobhan, it seems like she loses weight best with loss of stearic acid. I don't know if that had any sort of relevance.
Look, stearic acid, and also palmitate, induce a thing called a reverse electron transport. So what it does is it actually creates a signaling pathway through complex 1, and actually signals to the actual cells to basically biogenesis more mitochondria, that there's a lot of energy, and to create more capacity to oxidize foods. And it also has a number of other sort of, seems to have, some of the literature is not very clear how protective or whatever, but like anything, excessive uncoupling isn't a good thing. Excessive of anything isn't a good thing. I don't think basically inducing massive amounts and putting a lot of, let's say you would take a high dose stearic acid supplement and force excessive amounts of reverse electron transport, far more than naturally would occur through complex 1. Could that be damaging to the electron chain? We haven't done the experiment. Potentially could be. So is that a good idea? I would stick to basically real food that is balanced in a way, and our physiology is adapted to using those fatty acids in the profile that it is in the animal foods, and it's never caused us any problems. You know, it's only when people do idiotic things and sort of supplement fats, and I would never supplement fats. Not a good idea, you know, because fats can become damaged through especially a lot of the processes that a lot of the companies use and employ to extract them. So because they're always looking for the dollar and they're never doing the right thing by the consumer. So get it from real foods, guys. You don't need to get this supplemental stuff, this bullshit supplemental stuff. Do you think Paul's going to basically not run a commercial thing where he's putting poor quality honey and poor quality stearic acid? Potentially. I'm not saying that he is, but I would say that there is always a cost. It's either going to be very expensive and it's going to be a waste of time, or it's going to be very cheap and very nasty. So, you know, I mean, do you really need this sort of stuff? No, you don't. You know, give your body what it needs. Exactly. Just have some tallow, have some lard, have some beef suet. Just have some real animal fats that basically have a really good balanced profile. I mean, if you think about it, in your basically your bones, your bone marrow, it's more mufa. There's more, you know, mufa in there. And, you know, and if you look at basically most animal foods, they've got a very small amount of PUFA, and then the other parts are basically half saturated, half monounsaturated. They vary. Some have a bit more or a bit less, but, you know, because a lot of different tissues require different fats and different fatty acids. Yeah. So, you know, get it from real food, guys, you know, to basically, that is what your body's adapted to. It's designed to basically get it from real foods and incorporate it in tissues and oxidize the parts for energy that it needs. It's really good at been doing this thing for millions of years. You know, it's a really good machine. You know, just give it what it needs.
Yeah, well, yeah. And what would that be? Something that is natural.
Exactly.
No. We need pills.
Like a piglet, like a cow, like a goat, like a lamb. You know, I mean,
it's actually really simple.
It is. It's just real food.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the super chat. Where did Bart find this guy? Harry knows too much. You two are great. Thank you. Well, we dug him up in Tasmania. He's one of those tubers.
That's it.
Right. So I'm going to let you keep going and start maybe going down the rabbit hole of deuterium if you wanted to do that. So I find that quite fascinating. I think a lot of people, like, I mean, I understand the basics of it, but then I'm like, I don't really know a lot.
I just wanted to say one thing before I switch to that.
Go on.
And that was basically that when we look at insulogenic effects of foods, because when we're talking about drivers of insulin resistance, drivers of pathology, drivers, you know, what is driving diabetes? It is insulin resistance. Insulin resistance primarily comes from carbohydrates or mixed macronutrients where you're engaging the Randall cycle. You know, so this is where it's coming from. And let me just cover a few points. Robert Lustig, he has done really good research in this area, and he's actually shown, people should go, if they haven't seen it, should go and check it out. And he's actually shown that where he had a number of young kids, those young kids were basically, he took half of them, I believe it was, and they were basically left on the same, like the standard, what they were drinking, sodas and shit like that and crap, you know, the sort of regular stuff that kids. And what he did was he replaced every single one of those with a glucose-based food. So he eliminated basically things that had fructose in them and gave the child something that had glucose in it. So, and it was processed as well. So it went from processed foods that had a lot of fructose in to processed foods that had next to zero fructose in them. Isocaloric. And the kids actually on the low that were not taking in much fructose, in the end, to maintain their weight, they had to actually feed them slightly more than the other group.
Fascinating.
They lost no weight. They were weight stable at the end of the thing. The difference is one group basically still had fatty liver. The other one had reduced fatty liver. Demonstrating quite clearly that fructose is metabolized very differently in the liver. It actually creates fatty droplets, and it is problematic. So to be pushing a food like honey as a health food is just nonsense, because when you look at the science, it shows you something completely different. One, it's more glycating. Fine, we've spoken about that to the nth degree. I have in particular, but also when you do like a sad glucose diet and a sad fructose diet, the glucose one always comes out better. So that is telling you that basically fructose is not something we should be putting in our body. It was very rare in nature. Sugar in the form of fructose was very rare in nature for most of our history. Glucose varied depending on whether you had warmer patches with the interglacial periods, where warmer patches and you were able to access more starch, more glucose. And in those cases, and it's probably the reason why that ApoE 200,000 years ago, the ApoE in specifically one of those warmer time spots actually emerged as a gene to basically deal with that extra sugar that was coming in, because it became available in that period. Then it went away. Then basically about 80,000 years ago, again, we had a bit of a period where a warmer patch again. And then again, we're down to this. And we were heading over the next 100,000 years, we're heading to another ice age. To come out of an interglacial, lower, that warmer period, we're heading to a more colder period in our history in that regards. And so that part that a lot of people, well, that's the theory. Whether it's 100,000 or longer, we don't really know. There's a lot of, our science isn't that fantastic in that realm anyway. We've spoken about it, and I'm not going to go into it now. But these adaptations to small amounts of carbohydrate, over in specific seasonality as well, brought about these small changes to basically mitigate some of the deleterious effects of sugar. That should tell you something, that the body was forced to protect itself to make these changes with very small amounts in a tribal, because these people, still within these people, had very high, they had shifted from being hypercarnivores to supercarnivores. That means in those periods, the collagen that we derive from those warmer periods in our past history, and when we see these genetic changes happening, those warmer periods also, we notice the collagen that the humans, the tribal humans, are supercarnivores rather than hypercarnivores. Now, why is that? Because they've got access to some other foods as well in those warm periods, and they're accessing them, Yep. So it's not only us modern people that have got a sweet tooth. They had a bit of a sweet tooth back then as well. And, but they had very little access, because remember, if you take a look at a watermelon today, you can literally pull a muscle having to lift it. Where in the past period, it would literally sit in the palm of your hand. That's how small it was. So, we're talking about very little sugar, and the body had to protect itself from very little sugar, had to make these genetic adaptations, let alone, and shifted us from a hypercarnivore to a supercarnivore state. in terms of N15 isotope analysis. So these things match each other quite well through these periods. There's a lot of some graphs in different parts of the world can be a bit all over the place, but that's probably because certain plants may have been less available, or the humans in those parts may have been less interested, so there could have been a whole lot of other factors. So so if you do look at the old data, yeah, exactly, yeah, I know. Wonderful, aren't they?
They look pretty. I mean, I've never seen the yellow or orange ones before.
Well, they're supposed to entice you.
Yes.
They're not pretty, you won't eat them.
But they probably were, I don't know if you can see my mouth at all, but it's probably more like this size.
Yeah, no, they're even smaller than that.
Yeah.
They're even smaller than
enough.
that. That's actually
they look
one
quite
of the
small. Look at the grass.
No, that's actually a variety that actually exists in Southeast Asia. I've actually eaten it. I forget what it's called, but it does exist in Indonesia and things like that. And it's a really small little watermelon type thing. But it actually, you can fit it in your hands like that. We're talking about these were even smaller in the palm of your hands. That's how small they were.
Yeah.
So very different, very highly fibrous, completely different thing compared to the modern day thing. So that's one element. The other element that I did want to touch was that a lot of that our food supply is very different than what it was in the past, and a lot of the actual stuff that we actually when we look at like averages, a lot of the RDIs and a lot of these averages and all that, what they're derived from looking at people that are eating the current stuff.
Yep.
And that's how they're deriving them. It's the averages of that population. So we're talking about a population that is sick, that is getting these averages. So it tells us nothing what you should be the sort of profile that should be in your food to be healthy. So we just need to. There's a lot of mythology around the place, so we need to be careful now. If there's no other question out there, I'll shift to the deuterium side of things.
Yes, I think there was just something, but it's totally kind of... I'll get it up anyway because I want to know. It's totally unrelated, or not totally, but Paul recently spoke about how a certain amount of carbs can help to raise testosterone levels.
Okay, I haven't heard that. Okay. Is this Paul? Which Paul are we talking about?
I don't know. You guys have to be very.
You got to. I suspect it's probably Paul Saladino. They're probably talking about.
In that case, we can just discard it.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically that. It's basically about the thyroid, and it's basically about it's the repeat thing. You need more sugar to support your thyroid, and all this sort of nonsense.
Right.
I mean, yeah, look, I've heard it before. It's crap. What you need for your thyroid is basically you need good nutrition. That means you need enough iodine, enough selenium, enough zinc, sufficient copper. You don't need a lot of copper. Yeah, exactly. You need these sort of nutrients that actually support and all that. Also, when you have more protein, you tend to also reduce the amount of reverse electron transport. You get more reverse electron transport when you do fasting and when you basically do, and that's a protective mechanism because you don't want to you want to bring down slightly your thyroid so you don't basically, waste away too much muscle tissue. So it's a protective mechanism. Same thing in keto that actually happens, this thing. But on a carnivore diet, it doesn't. And the reason for it is taurine. Taurine seems to basically have an inhibitory effect on reversed electron transport. And there are, I am investigating some of the other aminos that may be playing a role, but I'm not going to say anything until I've investigated them properly, whether it's just association or whether there is real mechanism, and I don't know yet. So
because you don't want to be wrong in case someone has a study to prove you wrong.
Exactly. I will not.
We'll be back in 6 months.
I'm an empiricist, like Bart. I will not claim something that I don't have something to back myself up.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not like the rationalists who go out there, make computer models and do all this thing that have basically permeated academia, you know, like the string theory and all this. They've got no evidence for anything. They just basically have extrapolated from small amounts of data and then from there build an edifice of a theoretical edifice. That's not science. That's speculation. That is hypothesizing to the nth degree. As far as I'm concerned, you know, I would rather say I don't know. We don't know. We are basically still in civilization zero. We're still primitive. We still have very small understanding of the biochemistry, how the body works. There's a lot of gaps in our knowledge. We still don't understand the full energy. We've measured a certain level of energetics within the mitochondria, but we still can't work out exactly where it all is coming from. You know, yep, some is coming from sunlight. You can get a third if you're out there with UV. You know, that's true, but there is also a proportion that we don't really understand some of the dynamics and some of that. So we're still basically, you know, g'day, Shell. And yes, us bigots, us really bad Saladino bigots. Bigot, anti-Saladino bigots. Yes, that's what I meant to say. Yes, but so we need to be basically very careful that we're grounded on real good firm ground. You know, when we're arguing something, and this is why I say, you know, I remember I used on one of Bart's chats. I showed the study, which is on my bloody work machine. But I actually put it on my USB, but I don't know where I've got my USB at the moment, so I can't show it. I still haven't transferred on my regular machine, which is really bad.
Are you getting brain fog from all this meat?
Probably. But there's just too many other things to manage and deal with that I'm forgetting things. But and there's, you know, like I've probably got about, what is it now? I think files in those folders is probably getting now to about 5,000 files. There's just too many.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, there's just too many, and I need to start just opening them up and renaming them so I know what they're all about. So it's a bit of a mess at the moment. So sorry about that. But I did actually show a study with a rat study where it actually showed where they just fed the rat pure bacon, nothing else. And they actually gave it a sort of a cancerous a substance that causes colon cancer, particular. You know, meat causes colon cancer, the myth. So, and these rats the bacon was protective.
Oops.
Exactly. Oops. Another paradox. Oops. You know.
Oops.
So basically, here's a rat study for you repeat people out there, and it's on one of my chats with Bart. The last one, it was my last chat with Bart. You can actually find it there. Go and find it. Go and do some research, and pretty much it actually demonstrates quite clearly that bacon isn't an issue, that animal poofer isn't an issue. It's only when you actually have the primary chow for the actual rats. And what is the primary chow? I mean, you know it. It's full of seed oils, you know, canola oil, stuff like that. A bit of lard. They put a bit of lard in there with all this shit amount of oil, and then they add a whole lot of fructose, a very sugar. You know, and this is the standard chow that they give, and from that they derive knowledge. By adding then, so they create a very highly inflammatory food environment for the rat, and then they add and subtract things, and then they argue from that position that this food is bad. What a bunch of nonsense. You know, that's the sort of poor quality science we've got, and we need to realize.
My goodness.
There
you go.
So we'll move to the deuterium now.
Yes, Luke has been on it.
Yes,
He wants the deuterium.
yes. Now, what is the issue? The issue with basically with these foods is it's the level of deuterium that plays a big role as well. This is another side of the insulin resistance story. So if you're consuming a lot of foods, and we can see this, I'll give you an example to illustrate in real world. You go back and you look at populations, how hardy they were into old age. They really were strong. They were robust people. And they could do a lot of things. I mean, North American Plain Indians up to the age of 70, they could, like Sitting Bull, these big chiefs and Indian warriors, they could literally mount a horse and go into battle at 70. Okay? There's not many 70-year-olds who could do that today. So these people into old age had a lot of energy. We saw the same thing with the Maasai, older people that had the same blood pressure as George V. Mann had noted, that these populations that the younger people had, they were also robust old men that could still go out there and take on a lion to protect their animals. You tell me a 70-year-old or an 80-year-old that can take on a lion with a spear in today's world. So there is something fundamental different between those people and today's people. Now, what is it? It's basically that those people had a low deuterium diet. So the foods that they were consuming, whether they came from an animal source, like a cow will eat grass, which is low in deuterium because of photosynthesis. They will take that food and they will convert it into a high quality through fermentation in the vats, in the different chambers of their stomach, and then basically the last final thing, the animal product that they will create, which is a protozoa, those microorganisms, will basically be consumed in that final chamber, that final part of the stomach, which is highly acidic. Consequence of that is they are getting a low deuterium food. Animal foods are low deuterium by their nature. This is where there could be a problem with some foods that are coming from high deuterium sources. So this is where the deuterium side comes in. So let's say, you've got a whole lot of grains being fed to a whole lot of cows and stuff like that. Now, the concentration in the meat part and the fat part of these animals is going to be much higher in terms of deuterium. So when we look at studies on deuterium, we notice that pork that are just eating anything, pork, they just throw bits of animal food in there, bits of plant-based. It's a mix. They're actually having a mixed diet. So they're having low, high deuterium foods, all sorts of things. So even these pigs that are being just fed crap, they basically end up with a much lower deuterium profile. So their fatty acids have a deuterium level of around about 115 parts per million. Where tallow, on the other hand, and a lot of the tallow that's actually been looked at is primarily from, because a lot of these studies are in the US, so it's from feedlots, a lot of the animals. So the tallow there usually has about 124 parts per million. So it's much higher. Butter is about 122, around about there. Grass-fed, grass-derived type butter can come down to 120 odd. Poorer quality butter can be up to 124. So it can vary. Remember, the sweet spot is between around about 100 to 130. You don't want to be over 130 in terms of deuterium, but there is depletion. It's only when you're massively over that level when it becomes a problem, because you just overwhelm your body's ability to deplete. That's where the problem lies. But as long as you're eating foods that are below the 130, you're in the safe zone. Now, meat itself can vary. Now, the pork meat is much closer to the 130 odd, where the beef meat, and I think it's primarily because of these feedlots where they're calculating it, it can be up to 140 odd. You know, so the beef from these, I think that if you were to look at a grass, I haven't seen deuterium levels of a grass finished animal, so I can't really comment. I suspect it would be similar to the pig, maybe even better. The meat part we're talking about, not the fat part, but the meat part. So protein has higher levels. And this is another reason why I'm against protein shakes and protein powders and all that. Because when you take meat and you refine it, you increase the deuterium content even further. You actually push the deuterium content of these protein powders into the 150 odd mark, which is closer to that level that you find in basically that you find in sugar. So, you know, glucose is around the 140 odd, 145 plus mark, and so is fructose. And different refined sugars have different amounts. Water, because I didn't know, Banks Supreme goes, does rice cooked in tap water have a lot of deuterium? Yep, you know, so rice would have about, you know, it'd be about the 140 odd mark plus 142, I think it may be, around about that mark. I can't remember exactly. It's above 140, but exactly where. It's in the lower part. It's not in the higher part. And water is about 155 parts per million. Now, it can vary. There is fractionation of water. So the higher elevation you go, more UV radiation. So spring water from high elevation mountain water will be lower in deuterium. So there are, fat is the lowest, is the, you know, this is why, you know, animals like camels never get cancer, you know, because they have that big fat hump, and that is where they are extracting water from fat, which is the lowest deuterium source. And then you've got the other part, which is they're also eating cactus, and anything green does have lower deuterium. You know, obviously it has anti-nutrients and that, all that, so it's not the best food for us, but it does have lower deuterium levels. It's another reason why when you're on a low carb diet and you're eating greens and stuff like that, it's much healthier than more sugary stuff, because also it allows your mitochondria to work more efficiently. You know, you're getting lower deuterium water, you're actually putting less energy requirements to, or enzymatic requirements to you know, to deplete the deuterium out of your mitochondria. So, which is another important thing. Now, we know, and I'm not going to go through the whole discussion because I've explained it before to people, so I'm not going to explain this again. They can go and look at my past videos about, you know, how deuterium is pumped through the you know, and basically destroys the nanomotors and stuff like that and whatever. But when you've got too much deuterium in the system and you can't deplete it sufficiently, it becomes a problem. And this is what a lot of these sad diets do. You know, when it comes to basically seed oils, they're up to 255 parts per million, double that of sugar. So when you basically are overloading the mitochondria with far too much deuterium, and you end up basically busting a lot of the, you know, the nanomotors, what you end up is you end up lowering the capacity for that cell to produce energy through oxidative phosphorylation. When you do that, it doesn't take much to induce insulin resistance from any source of food. So if you're pumping a whole lot of seed oil into that poor rat and inducing a lot of mitochondrial damage and reducing the capacity for that, you could actually induce a state of insulin resistance and a state that mimics basically, and then you can say, oh, look, PUFA actually caused insulin resistance. But was it the PUFA, or was it because we've shown bacon being protective to the rat and not causing any sort of insulin resistance as just bacon? So I think also the player here is also deuterium. Deuterium the overloading, I mean, and even in human diets, there is far too much deuterium, too much seed oil being consumed. But the difference is when it comes to rats, the rat chow is extremely high in deuterium. So we're talking about from seed oils, because their primary foods are basically seed oils and these refined sugars. So you're pumping in, from the sugars, you're pumping in well over up anything from the 150 plus levels, and some of the refined stuff can get closer to 160. Then you're basically pumping in shitloads of seed oils that are up to the 120, 50 odd. The highest that I've seen in terms of seed oil, and I can't remember, I think it was a rapeseed oil, and it actually got up to the deuterium content of that specific type of vegetable oil got up to 255 parts per million. So it was the highest that I've actually seen. Canola oil and stuff like that can come a bit down, slightly lower. They do vary, anywhere. It's the remainder is anywhere between 200 on and upwards, in different amounts. But they're all, once you get over 130 and most of your food is coming in at over 130, you're going to be busting a whole lot of nanomotors. And this is why when people have been on a SAD diet for years and years and years, and those folds if you look at the mitochondria, it's got all these folds, and all those folds are basically electron chains. Okay? So each time you eat shit, you break some of those electron chains. And eventually, when you look at mitochondrial dysfunction, you actually notice that in the middle, those folds, there are very few of them that are left. They've been eliminated, damaged. And that means you have less capacity to generate energy, ATP. And if you've got less capacity to generate energy, this is why older people, you can see them. They're literally moving very slowly. They've been eating a high deuterium diets for a lot of years. They've destroyed a lot of their nanomotors, and they don't have the energy to move around anymore like they used to, let alone jump on a horse and go out into battle like the North American Plain Indians in their 70s. This is the difference between, so it's not only the macros and the type of, but it's also the deuterium side of these foods. The processed foods, especially the refined foods, are much higher, and they are a problem. And I say to people, bodybuilders and all that, stop consuming powders, stop destroying your nanomotors, eat eggs, eat beef, eat these sort of foods, eat real animal foods for your protein requirements. And there's a number of like milk and egg type sort of smoothies that I sort of recommend, and there's also a sort of an egg sort of mix and a dairy mix and all that. Yes, it is in a powder form. Yes, it does have more deuterium, but it definitely has lower deuterium than some of these other processed foods have. That's the difference. But I don't recommend people basically do a bodybuilding lifestyle unless you want to go into competition. So you don't need it. I don't do this. I don't do this. People come to me and say, I want to basically have gains in the gym. I want to basically compete. And I go, okay, do this. But I don't do it because I value my nanomotors. I want to have them around, and I want to basically keep the foods that are much lower in deuterium. And I know pork is, and I'm happy to basically, be a flag waver for pork. I know fish is as well. Fish is actually even better. Fish is actually even lower. I mean, the fats in fish tend to be in the lower 100 levels. So I always say to people, incorporate some fish in your diet as well. And I'm not talking about the DHA part here. It's more the deuterium side as well that I'm actually interested in. So, and that's why I sort of promote, as people know, I promote a Mediterranean style carnivore diet, which mixes a number of food sources, because you're going to get a much more richer mix of, the fatty acid profile, the amino acid profile, the micronutrient profile, the vitamins and minerals, because they are important cofactors to do a whole lot of processes. You're not going to get them in processed foods. You're not going to get them in powders. You're not going to get these micronutrients. Even our food supply is very divorced and very low in these sort of things. And that's why sometimes, I do some colloidal minerals where it's like a mineral supplement, which has got a profile of all these trace minerals and stuff like that, because they're very depleted in our soil. So even animals that are grazing are not getting enough what they used to in the wild, because we had an environment that actually, because of tectonic plate movements, because of volcanism and stuff like that, we had certain minerals that were moved around. Also, we had in a lot of these parts, we had also a lot of things like bacteria and a much richer, worms and stuff like that. And they turn the soil over, they move minerals around, they bring them closer to the surface, closer to the base of the grass. So when the cow is eating the grass, that grass will have more mineral density. The problem is a lot of grasses now, and even in so-called pastured areas, they're using, to get rid of certain types of, pests. They're using chemicals and stuff like that. So it's not a clear, clean, pristine type, approach to a lot of agriculture. And this is why it's not enough to, you sort of have to focus on the organic side as well, not just basically the grass finished side. So it's a bit more complex story, but that's that. But at the same time, that is more costly for people, and I understand, and I'm sympathetic to people's inability. And I go, well, then try and get some of these foods in. It's not going to be the most optimal because they haven't been produced in the best way, but they're going to be much better than the seed oils or the grains or all these other things that are much higher in deuterium and much higher in a lot of pesticides and many other endocrine disruptors and all these other things. So there's always the financial side of things. So I'm sympathetic to that with people, and I try to push people to get a more diverse type of food profile. Sometimes things like mussels and oysters and stuff like that are a good option as well, because they're very mineral dense. So if you're not getting it from the ruminant animals, you can get a bit from those. You don't have to have them every day. You have them once a week, or once a fortnight. You'll add a bit additional, so you don't have to even supplement with trace minerals or anything like that. So there are a whole lot of things that you can do to basically try and actually improve the profile of your health. But really important things that people need to understand is that we need to minimize the amount of mitochondrial damaging foods. And so, when we look at the seed oils, they need to be taken out. When we look at all refined sugars, they need to be taken out. Honey is not a food, guys. It's just not a food. When you look at the nutrient profile, it's shit. If you want to use it topically, like you've got a cut and you want to use it topically, like really raw honey as a topical thing, antiseptic or whatever, fine. But, don't use it as a food. It's not a food. It's not meant to be a food, and it's very high in deuterium as well, because the honey bees go after trying to get high deuterium, sources of, so they even, use, I've discussed it before, but, people probably forgotten, so I'm not going to give you too much because I want to make a video about it.
Awesome. So if you have mitochondrial damage, which probably like 80% of the population does, that is above 40 or such,
pretty much.
Shall we try to make it a high fat diet rather than a high protein diet to heal?
Yeah. You really need to push up the fat levels, because you really need to allow your body to deuterium deplete. And for some people that have got a lot of mitochondrial damage that I'm dealing with, people that are being given like 5 years to live or whatever, I basically got them on metabolic water on, out of, deuterium depleted water. So to flush out, because a lot of them have actually destroyed the Krebs cycle in their mitochondria. They basically are in a glycolytic state. They can't get their blood sugar down. They're in a glycolytic state, and it's quite obvious that what's happening. And they've got really poor energy. They're really, they feel they can't move. They are struggling in many regards. And so it's a matter of actually flushing out that deuterium and trying to basically allow some restoration, and also trying to improve their sleep quality, because you need a bit of melatonin to basically. Now, the problem with melatonin is I usually use a pulsatile effect. So I use a very low dose, which is your requirements. So about a quarter of that requirement, just a small dose for like a week, no melatonin, then another, so a sort of a play with that, in order to basically, one lady that I'm trying to get to do a bit of that, she's finding it very hard and feeling really crappy. And I know why, because she's in a transition, but, and I'm struggling to convince her, to do certain things, because she got results from the other stuff, and she's slowly improving, but she's really damaged. But she's not I'm struggling, even though she's using some of these methods on her son who's autistic and she is getting results, she's still with herself. I'm struggling to convince her with a couple of things to do, but it's just, I sympathize. I feel for her, because she's really doing it hard. I've probably spent more time on her than many other people, is because she is in such a messed state compared to other people. But this is the problem when you have multiple cases of chemotherapy, and you go through the ringer through the medical system, and you're so damaged. Most of these people, because they've got so much mitochondrial damage, they just die within a couple of years. They waste away, or get a final cancer that kills them off completely. And this is the sort of the problem in that regard. I need to get her to a certain level of depletion before I can actually do the other parts of my protocol with her. And it's a bit of a trial and error. So I need feedback from her, and sometimes she sort of ignores me for a while because she's really feeling crappy or whatever, but I need feedback to basically know where she's at, to basically make the changes, because certain interventions can have like deleterious effects. I'll give you an example. If you've basically got a lot of mitochondrial damage, the last thing you want to be doing is putting precursors that are going to increase your NAD+, because they're going to just basically, they're going to ravage with too many electrons. They're going to ravage your electron chain. So it's not a good thing. It's you need to first fix it, heal it, and then you can basically use it to produce more energy. So there are steps, and you have to be very careful. And sometimes people are impatient as well, and that's why I don't tell them. I don't give them the information. I give them what they need to know at that point. And that's why I need feedback, because I know that if I tell them, they'll go and do things too early because they want to see more results quicker. But if you've done so much damage to yourself, it's not going to happen overnight. It's just not. It's just the way it is. You need to step through. And for me, that she as a person actually illustrates to me the importance of basically maintaining good mitochondrial health and not putting this sort of food into my diet that actually does so much damage, because I don't want to end, and I look at older people sometimes on the street when I'm walking that have got these walkers and they can hardly move. They are really, and I mean, one lady that in my neighborhood, I haven't seen her. She's probably passed away. I haven't seen her now for months, but she was on one of these walkers, struggling continuously, but, at some point your body, can't produce enough energy, can't repair enough, and too much senescence in organs takes place. That you end up with too many senescent cells that are dysfunctional, and eventually that organ ceases to work anymore. and at that point you pass away. So it's really important, guys, that you all understand that you want to have a low deuterium diet, because you need to maintain the capacity to create energy. The more capacity you've got to create energy, the better you will be long term, because you'll have the capacity to basically repair. Because we're in a struggle between, as Ron Rodsdale would say, even though I disagree with him on mTOR, but when it comes to, there's a struggle between, repair and damage is always winning. Even in the most healthiest bodies, damage is always winning. So why add more to your misery, So it's really important that people understand that you need to keep deuterium down. You need to basically sleep properly. You need to basically use blue blocking glasses, I mean, mine are here, next to my computer, So, and I've got the other ones over there when I watch TV, So you've got to have the sort of stuff that you need. Change
so
your
how
light
is
bulbs.
deuterium stored in our bodies?
Well, deuterium is basically used as a growth factor by the body as well. And it has a number of other biological processes as well. But when it comes to, you still, look, if you didn't have enough deuterium, you would basically end up with lower growth factors in the system. And if you end up with lower growth factors, you would waste away. So you still need some deuterium, but you don't want too much. So that's why I say to people, I don't, unless you've got a health reason, you shouldn't be buying metabolic water that is below 100 parts per million and flooding your body with a whole lot of low deuterium water, because that can be quite catabolic as well. So you don't want to be doing that. It's the sweet spot. And it's, growth factors do have an important role in, cellular turnover, collagen turnover, in all these sort of areas. So if you have, let's say you're on a very low deuterium diet for a very long period of time, you would probably see more collagen breakdown.
Right.
So it's not a good thing, So you don't want to be too high, because then you're busting your nanomotors, because you're overloading your mitochondria to a level where it can't deplete. So all those enzymatic processes where water production happens in the TCA cycle, and also glycolysis, where you've got basically dehydrogenase, all those different stages, those 10 enzymatic pathways in glycolysis as an example. But there you're actually stripping off. But the body has only a certain capacity to do that. Over a certain threshold, it can't manage it anymore. And that's when some of this, where exactly it is, do I know? No, because there is no study that's actually demonstrated that to me. So I don't know. But I would rather stay in the safe zone by eating animal products that keep that level below 130 parts per million most of the time, then really try to say, I'm going to try and get it to my basically deuterium depletion right to the edge. What's the logic in that? When I look at a low deuterium, an animal like a camel that's closer to the 100 continuously, and basically nearly lives, lives as long as it can actually cell divide, and then it just drops dead. And that's why Arabs say, if you're going to go out into the desert, don't take a camel, take a horse, because at least you can see that the horse basically is getting older and needs to be replaced. A camel, it's very hard to tell its age, so you could end up dying out there because it just drops dead on you. So that's the sort of difference. So if you want to stay in the low 100s, you would probably have the best level of repair capacity in your body. So you would end up with much healthier looking body in general. So what would be the best combination? Well, the best combination would be basically pork and fish. because they're both the lowest deuterium sources, in a sense, if you're going to look at that. Plus, pork has higher levels of niacin. So niacin, which is also good for the mitochondria, for NAD+. Plus, it also inhibits CD38, which is basically a thing that reduces NAD+ over time. So that's another benefit for energy production. And so the redox potential of your of the electron chain will improve because of that. So, that's why I like those foods. That's why I keep them in my diet, and when people poo-poo them or stuff like that in this sort of reductionist way, I'm going, well, if you're eating foods and you're keeping your inflammation down and you're not eating other things, because a lot of these people, I know people that basically say, eat pork, and then I do a bit of an investigation. I realize they're actually having some carbs in there, or carb cycling, or doing other things, and then blaming the pork for that rather than the carb cycling. And so, I say to people, show me a real study. And whenever I look at a real good study where there's only pork or bacon, whether it's in a rat or a human or whatever, or population studies that are looking at populations that are eating specific types of foods, primarily like the Okinawans and the Sardinians that consume a lot of lard and pork and stuff like that, I don't see those things, those issues. So, I put a question mark on the sort of N of one that people argue, and when I see basically that one of the foods that chimps can hunt down are small piglets. Early hominins also consume. So how could a food that's been in our diet ancestrally for so long be a problem? It just doesn't make sense to me, and I can look at all the studies that they do, and I can say, well, okay, it's got seed oils, which is a high deuterium thing, plus it's oxidized and rancid. It's going to cause a lot of inflammation and damage and all that. It's it's going to basically damage the electron chain as well, because of these oxidative products that it'll produce. Plus the deuterium levels will damage the nanomotors. So you add all this up and you go, well, obviously these foods are causing all these problems from a whole lot of different pathways and different ways. So why would people think that? Why would then people extrapolate the PUFA part and ignore all this other sort of stuff that's playing that is a player in the disease profile of these humans or these rats or whatever? So it's these sort of very narrow reductions. You could find a study for anything. There's plenty of junk out there. You could find a study for anything. Really, can you find something which is really solid that can actually infer causation, can basically prove something? And there's not much out there. As Bart knows, the science is really piss poor. It's crappy. As well, you've looked at some of the literature in the specific areas that you've worked in and researched. And unfortunately, it's really poor. And I say to people, really, you're hanging your hat and your diet on this study, on this rat study, and you're ignoring all these other confounding variables in the study, and you're pointing at one element. It's just nonsense that's been in the human diet for millions of years, in hominins and in Homo sapiens, obviously for 350,000 years, but who's counting? It's just bizarre. I just can't wrap my head around it.
I'm wondering a bit, how long would it take if you start eating low deuterium foods and you're overloaded right now? How long does it take? Where is the resistance? It sounds like it should be quite easy to get it down or flush it out.
It should be. Technically, it should be. It should basically be quite quick, technically, because you're, you're basically, every single bolus of food that you're actually putting into your body is going to have a different deuterium profile. So in terms of deuterium, reductions in deuterium, that can happen quite quick by just changing the foods you select. But the getting the energy back is a different thing altogether.
Yeah.
You know, that can take a bit of time with good sleep, because melatonin is very important for healing the mitochondria. So if you're not getting good sleep, that can be a problem as well. So you may be on a low deuterium diet, but you're not producing enough melatonin. You're not in a cooler, darker room to basically, get deeper sleep and sort of to more healing of your mitochondria. So that can take time as well if you're not doing that sort of stuff. If if you're basically in an environment where there's too much blue light, you're also going to be damaging the mitochondria, and you're not going to be helping yourself as well to recover. So there's a lot of things that you have to do. So there's the blue light things, there's the EMF thing. As I say to people, I'll end up knocking. I won't pull it because it's behind all this other shit that I've actually got here. So, but I've shown people before, I use Ethernet cables. So I connect everything, all my computers, via Ethernet. It's all over the place. I've got cables going through the back, and just in where the cornices are, sort of, trying to either above or below all these damn cables, and they just glued against the actual, they sort of flow around the doors and stuff like that. I've drilled holes and whatever, but it's basically so I use Ethernet. I minimize the amount of exposure to EMFs anyway in that regard. So if there's a lot of factors that you have to do, that makes the difference. Somebody asked me I'm in the field of spatial science, which is basically, covers cartography, mapping, it's all these sort of things. So so you could call me basically a modern day cartographer in that regard if you really wanted to. But that's where my work is, and that's what I'm, trained, and so it's spatial science is part of the engineering faculty, if anybody wants to know. But we're not really engineers in that regard. You may the discipline and approach to is similar to other parts of the faculty of engineering. We deal with data, so we do data mining, data analysis, and all our features have metadata on them and stuff like that. So, so let's say it helps with, it's a bit like Ivor. He's basically pretty good with numbers as well, because he comes from an engineering background, and people like that tend to be, we deal with data. And when you deal with data, it's really good. It's much easier to analyze data as somebody that's actually learnt in their profession to do that, where somebody who hasn't, who comes from another type, whether even doctors, they're not, they're trained in pharmaceuticals and things like, one of my cousins, he's a specialist doctor, another one's a pharmacist, but they are trained very narrowly within pharmacology or stuff like that, chemistry, bio, those sort of things, but it's a very narrow thing. But a lot of them don't deal with a lot of data, where sort of when you look at my field, we deal with a lot of data, and even the section that I work in is very much data focused related, so it has to do with all the different bits of related mapping data, and we're also now even using AIs to basically analyze data for us. So it's more, we're moving towards a world of more data analytics. So where we get machines to basically analyze the data, and then we overlook and assess and sort of manage that. So my field is changing, and probably by the time I get out, I'll be basically probably be supervised by an AI. I'm kidding. Yes, we're still in control of them, in my field at least. But yeah, it's an interesting. My field has changed quite a lot from the old days of traditional cartography and dye lines, and actually, using all these old type of instruments and all that to to capture features, and some of the old surveying methods that were used in the past. God almighty, I mean, if you go even further back, one of my mates actually was a chainman. So he was one of the chain gangs that went around actually measuring with a long chain of 100 links. They would measure different parts. 100 links is basically 20.117 meters. So yeah, so basically, in those days, it was a very different profession compared to today, where we're at. It's a very different world. It's very much computer driven and data driven. So analyzing data and determining changes and stuff like that. So it's different. It's different than what it used to be. I enjoy it in that regard. My capacity is less. I still do some of the work. I do a bit of coding now and then. I've sort of, because I'm about 6 years out from retirement. I've sort of been pushed in because I've got younger people that have come in and we've employed, and so I've now am required to do more sort of sort of paperwork, doing more paperwork, which I don't enjoy, and so I need to do documentation and all this sort of stuff, and I need to mentor these younger people and do their training and and do sort of different stages of their training. So we're still because it takes a couple of years to basically get to a certain proficiency. So I get continually reminded by my boss that I need to be interacting with more of these younger people, and basically they need to be picking my brain more and more. So yeah, it's anyway, I won't go into too much about my work, but yes, it's an interesting area. I enjoy the work more than being sort of, you could say, being pushed to do anyway, but it has to be done because these younger people need to learn anyway. So anyway, I'm not going to go into it. Move on. We'll move on to other things. I don't really like talking about my work. I keep work,
we noticed.
Family, separate. I try to keep them, generally just what I do. Yep, but I don't want to go into details because there is privacy issues related to all this sort of stuff.
So we have some questions that I think we should answer. So the one that is on the screen has been there for a while.
Yep.
Would rinsed white rice that's reheated have less deuterium?
Don't know. No. Whether it would or wouldn't. Reheated. Well, reheated would basically reduce. Technically, if you think about it, reheating something would actually reduce the moisture content. If you're reducing the moisture content, you're probably getting rid of more of that water that's probably got more deuterium. So potentially yes, but by a very minor amount. That's all. T2, why the fuck are you consuming rice anyway?
Exactly. Oh, it's for my mum.
I bet it is. I bet it is.
I don't know. Yeah.
These damn
question
birds.
From me. What's the deuterium level in milk and cream? Because you like to eat a lot of that.
That tends to be it varies. Well, milk is quite a lot of low deuterium water. So it's I can't remember 100 and it's below 130, but I can't remember exactly how much.
Okay.
where exactly it is, but it isn't a high. The sugar part is as high as any other glucose, so it's about 155 parts per million. The protein part is very similar to butter in terms of the protein, the deuterium levels of the, which is a sort of around the 138, I think it is. And when you look at the fats, they're quite low because a lot of them are saturated, which tend to be, much lower. So, but then there's the water content, because a lot of milk is a lot of water. And a lot of the water is basically low deuterium water. So it's just because it's coming from the grass. And that grass is depleted in deuterium. So, obviously, if you're feeding the cows grains, that milk is going to be much higher in deuterium. My stuff is pastured. Both my cream and my milk is pastured. So there's not, plus the milk is raw. It's pastured raw, so that's fine in that regard. So it's lower deuterium. But if you're looking at milk, like in the US in particular, and that's because we do have people from the US, and I sometimes forget about that part of the world, milk there would be much higher in deuterium. That's true. For the reasons would be because primarily also some of the manufacturers there do add water to dilute as well. Milk products, in parts of the world, they will dilute, and as a consequence, you'll end up pushing the deuterium levels much higher. So the problem is we don't have any good research. It's a problem. It's to basically, and also some of the milks in the US also, not only do they add a bit of water, but sometimes they add a bit of sugar as well. So there's so many, it's so confounded, American milk. It's really hard to, if you can get raw milk in America, fine, good. If you can get milk that is full cream, milk tends to have none of these other issues. And especially if you get organic, like if you can't get raw milk, so its micronutrient profile will be slightly diminished. But if you want to make sure that you're actually getting a milk that is low in deuterium, you'd have to look at an organic milk. So an organic pasteurized milk under those sort of circumstances. It's the problem with the food supply, the way it's so much processing and so much variations in it today. It's really hard to basically, I can talk about raw milk that is pastured. It's lower deuterium, but all the other milks are so varied. It would be impossible for me to give you a figure because a lot of them haven't even been measured. So just think, less sugar in it, less of a problem. Organic, it's going to be less likely to be basically, that they've added other things in, that it's probably going to be pastured and stuff like that. It's always hard, and I haven't really researched. I can't recommend any milk in the US because I haven't researched any milk in the US. So so really there are some websites. I know there are some low carb websites in the US that have basically got information about the quality of the milk and the milk sourcing. If I'll try and find the actual website, and I'll pin it. I'll put a comment on your video right after, because I can't actually. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, no worries. We have a few more questions, so let's move on before you have to go to your stream.
Oh, that's true. 15 minutes time.
Yeah. So if you treated water with a degasser, would it lower the deuterium levels?
Nah, you need massive amounts of energy. You know, it doesn't work. I know a lot of people have looked at some of the internet sites where they say, oh, you can deuterium deplete water and stuff like that. Only a couple of parts per million. It is very expensive and it takes a lot of energy. It has to be done in an industrial setting. And in Hungary and in a couple of other countries, but they actually do it on an industrial scale. Plus, the waters coming from those sort of rivers are much cleaner. So you got that. It's on an industrial scale, and their energy costs are much lower in Hungary compared to many other countries. So they're actually able to produce it at a lower price, not for their domestic consumption. For their domestic, it's because their price purchasing power in Hungary is much lower than some of the other countries in the world. But in terms of, countries like the US, Australia, New Zealand, where our price purchasing power is much higher, but it's still expensive. It's really expensive, and we only need to really use it for people that are really sick, that have really got a lot of mitochondrial damage. So we can actually flush out the deuterium. We can change the homeostasis of the water in their mitochondria, and then with good sleep, melatonin, with good other practices, life practices, slowly try and restore and reverse that damage. It takes time, especially mitochondrial damage can take time. And I don't encourage a lot of bio cloning because what happens is when you do a lot of bio genesis of mitochondria, if they're damaged, you're just going to produce more damaged mitochondria. So you really need to heal the mitochondria before you actually get into all these biohacks of biogenesis. I do a bit, but I primarily focus on, circadian rhythms, better sleep, reducing blue light exposure, doing all these sort of things that are going to basically give my body a chance to basically heal my mitochondria. So then, that little biogenesis that I do, and I do a low grade, I don't do a high grade because I'm still not, I don't think that I'm completely out of the woods in terms of the damage that I did to myself in the past. And so I take it at a slower rate, sometimes being like the the turtle is a better way of being than the actual the hare. So I know a lot of people are but I always say to people, do you want to live longer and healthier and robust and all that? Well, it takes time to heal and reverse a lot of the damaging effects, and popping pills and supplements and all that are not going to really do it for you, in that regard. The other thing is I know a lot of people out there are trying to do some people are trying to do a lot of high doses of certain things, like NAD plus type precursors. Waste of money if you're over 40, because especially over 50, because CD38 enzyme keeps on going up, which actually breaks down. We don't know exactly why CD38 does go. It may be a protective mechanism that as mitochondrial get more damaged, it may be a protective mechanism to reduce the energetics within the electron chains, to basically reduce the amount of further damage to the electron chain. This is a hypothesis of mine. Can't prove it. But, if we look around the world populations, I have seen varied data of CD38 enzyme increases. And it seems that as energy goes down, so less mitochondrial efficiency, CD38 goes up. So I think it's maybe a protective mechanism from the body rather than something that, and trying to biohack it by deliberately trying to force it down could be counterproductive. The other thing is a lot of these guys using precursors like, David Sinclair, and many others that are using these precursors. The thing that they forget is that, yes, you may actually increase NAD+, but CD38 degrades it. So at some point, you're wasting your money because you can't keep up with CD38. So really, mitochondrial health, circadian rhythms, sleep, blue light, all these things are more important to basically, fix your mitochondria, to basically allow them to be able to utilize, to basically be able to generate more NAD+. And then some of these precursors like niacin that I do low doses and stuff like that have some efficacy in the game, because niacin has a really nice thing about it. It suppresses CD38. It doesn't eliminate it, but it suppresses it back to more youthful levels. And it basically also brings NAD to more youthful levels, as long as you're staying in a low inflammatory environment, low in deuterium, obviously, and at the same time you're keeping the amount low. You don't, as I said, you don't want to be over 300. So you want to keep the amount of niacin below that. These sort of 3 grams and 4 grams that people talk about, that are taking these really massive doses of niacin. 1, it really fucks up lipolysis. 2, it shuts down gluconeogenesis. It really makes a mess. It puts you in a very glycolytic sort of state. So yeah, it may make you a much more efficient. As I said to one comment that I made about David Sinclair, it may make him a more efficient, fat sugar burner. But what's the logic in that? Because he's ignoring the deuterium side of things. And then the other thing is, and then he takes metformin to basically deal with that side of things. And I'm going, God almighty, the things that these people do. But he's relatively younger. He started this when he was, in his 30s. And so, you can do it when you're younger, but at some stage, you get diminishing returns as you get older because of all these other factors. Yeah.
One more question
from
Luke. Is it possible that people that experience inability to gain weight on carnivore are actually suffering from too much deuterium depletion? That's a very intelligent question.
Maybe.
Very interesting.
Maybe if you're basically able to burn off stuff, because the younger you are, your mitochondrial density is much higher. This is what's hard to get really fat when you're young. Another reason, your ability to burn off energy is much more efficient. So as you get older, you sustain more mitochondrial damage. And so both from deuterium, but from other factors as well, like asleep, blue light, there's a lot of different factors, certain, just other factors can be pathogens in the environment, can actually have, like viruses, can have damaging effects to your mitochondria. So there can be a number of factors over a lifespan that can actually have an effect on your mitochondria. But I would say that it possibly is. It's probably the reason why when you eat more certain types of food, you'll become fatter. But there's a difference between fatness and muscleness. There are 2 different types of weight gain things. So I would rather go with using leucine and rich foods, animal foods, to build muscle. And when you look at the studies, when you increase the amount of protein from animal foods and sodium, you increase muscle mass. So I'd rather go for that sort of weight gain than the other type of weight gain, because it's going to be less deleterious to your system. Yep.
Cool. People are getting worried here that you're not going to turn up for your own stream.
It's 5 minutes away.
Do you not need a wee or something? You're just sitting there for 5-6 hours talking.
Yeah, I can. That's my anti-diuretic hormones that are actually upregulated.
Awesome. Harry, it has been very educational, and I, for one, could probably ask you a lot more questions, but I'm not going to because I know that you should be going. And to be frank, I need to move because I'm getting crazy sitting down for this long. I need to get my standing desk working again so I can at least stand. But
it's important.
Yeah, I think, I still have questions.
I need about 4 minutes to go out there and basically do some some stretch exercise and a few things. Yeah, I'm going to do that and then come back. They can wait.
Oh, that's rude. Okay, so I'll just make it very quick. Thank you so much for coming on this Sunday morning. I think we have all enjoyed it. There has been a lot of activity in the chat, and if you don't know yet, then head over to Harry's stream, which is somewhere. I'll post it in a second. Do you have any final words? You get 30 seconds to give your final words. You have to go.
I think we've covered. But if people want to ask me more questions, they can come over to my stream and ask me.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you
so
go.
Here's the link, and put it there in the chat. I can put it up on the screen, but you can't click it on the screen, so you'll still have to go there.
Yeah. Thanks, Pim.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I need blood in my legs. I'm going to go and walk the puppies now.
Good idea.
Thank you, Shell. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Science Unbiased. And I'm misclicking here, but thank you, Lukey, and everyone else. Necro, I saw that you're here as well. T2, where the fuck is T1? I don't know, but
hiding in Perth.
Exactly. So thank you for being here, and head over to Harry's stream, go and do some stretching, etc., and ask your questions there.
Anyway,
awesome.
See you guys.
Bye.